This tutorial examines the use of version control systems within the Atollic TrueSTUDIO IDE. It should be remembered that the IDE automatically supports version control through the local file history, and this can be accessed using the view mechanism. For example, Window, Show View, History. Here, for the particular file open in the window, a local file history is shown, and I can select two versions, right click and compare with one another, and here we can see that I made some changes. This is a local file history and therefore is tied specifically to the project and to the IDE. However, organizations commonly have their own version control system in place, and more commonly these days they use an open source tool such as Subversion. This tutorial covers the usage of Subversion within the Atollic IDE. It does not, however, provide a complete introduction to the usage of version control systems, and specifically does not cover repository maintenance, security policies, the structure that repositories should take, etc. Such things are normally company specific and defined and maintained by an independent group within a company. Version control systems allow multiple developers to work on multiple projects in concert with one another, and usually allow the product to be released and maintained in a very structured manner. So multiple versions or multiple releases over the product lifecycle can easily be maintained, and should a bug be found, for example, in an old release, then it can be very quickly tracked down and changes applied to the old release patched out to existing users and or patched up to the existing tip version of the project which is being developed. So, how do we access Subversion from within Atollic TrueSTUDIO? The first thing we need to do is to ensure that we have the available menus available within our system. So we'll close down the local file history view, and under Window, Customize Perspective, I want to ensure that for my menu visibility I have SVN available. Now here I wanted to enable it, but it tells me it's not an available command group, so I'd like to switch to the available command group menu and make sure that I have Subversion enabled. I can then come back, and Subversion is enabled both at the toolbar and at the menu level. By clicking OK, I now have an extended toolbar, as you can see here, all these greyed out options here for version control, and I have a new menu which is Subversion. There are multiple views within the IDE to support the use of Subversion. Window, Show View, and here we can see under the groups SVN, which is the short version or short name for Subversion, I can look at Subversion repositories. It should be noted that there are different types of access available to Subversion repositories. Specifically, you can use multiple different protocols, and that's dependent on your setup. So, for example, you can use the HTTP protocol or HTTPS protocols for secure versions, or the Subversion protocol. If you happen to have your repository located on a local file system, you can also use what's called the file protocol, which gives you direct access. If I want to get access to an existing repository, I can either right click and specify a new repository location, or provide the same information through clicking on the button up here. Now, as I mentioned, there are different ways of accessing existing repositories, and I would have to specify them up here through the URL. So for example, if it was using the SVN protocol, it would be something like svn:// and then the location of the repository being accessed. However, here we don't actually have a repository at this point in time, so we're going to create one. Within the IDE, if you click on Create, the repository will by definition be created on the local file system because it doesn't have an ability to create some remote repository on some remote server. Therefore, all you have to do is enter the local path within the file system for the repository that you want to create. So I can specify here. The option you see on the dialog is an internal layout option within Subversion. It allows you to specify whether Subversion uses its own native file system to manage its information or whether it uses a proprietary database using SQL, such as Berkeley DB. We'll just stick to the file system version because it's simpler and it's actually faster in many situations. So I'll click on OK, and the repository has now been created on the local file system. At this point in time it doesn't contain anything, and what we want to do is add our project to the repository. So I can right click on my project under Team, Share Project. So we'll go for Subversion, and we'll use the existing repository location that we've just defined. Now it should be noted that within Subversion there are different ways of managing multiple projects. If we look down here, I've clicked on Advanced Mode and you'll see that it's given me an example here. This is the definition of the file protocol, this is the location of the repository, and the default here is to have trunk, tags and branches as the root level entries within the repository, and then each project is effectively a subdirectory off of those. That's one way of representing the information. There's another way of doing it, which is to use what's called the multiple projects layout, and using empty name here, and what you can see it's the other way around here. So effectively each project gets its own entry within the root level of the repository, and then it has its own trunk, tags and branches underneath. It's purely down to personal preference and also company policy. In this particular instance I will go for the second option. Okay, so it's now saying would you like to share this project into that, which is absolutely fine, and this is the commit message. So within all version control systems, every time you make a change to the repository you must specify a commit message, and that's what we're doing here. Now the project is being entered into the version control system. What you'll notice is that the Project Explorer has now been annotated with the information of the version control system, and within the source files they have these little question marks come up, and that means that effectively their status is unknown within the version control system, i.e. they're not under version control. By default the version control system only allocates certain types of files to be put under version control. Binary files are normally not included because they change too quickly and are normally too large, and of course can be regenerated from the source files. So the filters in this instance are including the project setting files and the source files, and this has automatically been selected by the project for me, so it's a very simple thing to do. And I can specify my commit message. I click OK, and what we'll now see is that the question marks have actually disappeared from around those source files, and they now have new annotation against them, which actually tells me the revision number that those files are currently at within the version control system. So all version control systems maintain version control revision information for either files or projects, or in the entire repository in the case of Subversion, and this tells me that I currently have the source files checked out against the state of the repository as of revision version number 2. The project is now under version control, and therefore the Subversion menu is now fully enabled to let me control and interact with the version control system.